January 23, 1943. Eglin Field Proving Ground, Florida. The thermometer read 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Freezing, even for the panhandle. Standing in the bitter cold, Samuel Green watched steam rise from the barrel of a machine gun that had just failed for the 17th time in 2 hours. It was the Browning M2.50 caliber, the cornerstone of America's air defenses. But up here, in freezing test conditions, the weapon had jammed again and again. Nearby, Major Robert Johnson, furious and defeated, slammed his clipboard into the frozen sand. "We have 423 B-17s in England right now," he snapped, each mounting 13 of these guns. "If they freeze above 20,000 feet, we're sending those crews to die defenseless." The numbers were brutal. Thousands of American lives depended on these guns working in the sky. And right now, they didn't. Samuel Green wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't a soldier, not an engineer, not even a high school graduate. He was a 52-year-old toolmaker from Connecticut, quiet, meticulous, invisible to most. And yet, he stood at the heart of a crisis the U.S. military couldn't solve. As others gave up, Green picked up a small notebook from his tool bag and jotted down a single sentence. "The problem is not the gun. The problem is we're trying to make the gun work like we think it should work instead of letting the gun tell us how it wants to work." To the engineers around him, it sounded like nonsense. To Green, it was a map, a different way of thinking, one that would soon shake the entire U.S. military to its core. The M2.50 caliber machine gun wasn't just any weapon. It was the last design of John Moses Browning, a masterpiece created in 1918 and adopted across every branch of the U.S. military. By 1942, it was everywhere, mounted on bombers, fighters, tanks, naval ships, and jeeps. America had committed fully to this gun as its universal heavy machine gun. But when war moved to the skies over Europe, a terrifying truth emerged. Above 20,000 feet, where temperatures dropped below minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, the M2 stopped working. It jammed, constantly. And in combat, a jammed gun isn't an inconvenience. It's a death sentence. By late 1942, the numbers painted a nightmare. Of 213 bombing missions flown, 161 reported multiple gun failures, a staggering 76% malfunction rate. Each B-17 carried 13 minutes and 2 seconds, but on average, nearly 5 were failing per aircraft. German pilots learned fast. They watched for bombers drifting out of formation or failing to return fire. In December alone, 14 American bombers were shot down after losing all their defensive firepower to gun jams. That's 140 airmen dead or captured because their weapons simply didn't work. The U.S. had the planes, the bombs, and the men. But without working guns, all of it was pointless. Panic spread through the Army Ordnance Department. They launched immediate investigations. Engineers tested cold-weather lubricants, adjusted ammunition tolerances, even installed heating elements. None of it worked. Between October 1942 and January 1943, over $2 million was spent on traditional engineering fixes. And yet, the malfunction rate in freezing conditions barely budged, still hovering over 60%. Time was running out. Men were dying. The military had hit a wall. That's when Samuel Green, a man no one had asked for, quietly stepped into the story and changed everything. At the Pratt & Whitney plant in Hartford, Connecticut, the same weapon was failing in cold weather tests. Management, desperate, offered a $1,000 bonus to anyone who could fix it. Engineers dismissed the challenge. "The design is perfect," they insisted. "The problem must be external." But Samuel Green didn't buy that. After nearly 4 decades of building tools, he had learned one universal truth: no machine is perfect. Every mechanism has quirks, something that only hands-on experience can detect. That night, Green took home a faulty M2 and began to listen, not to specs or data, but to the machine itself. In his basement workshop, Green did what no one else had thought to do. He disassembled the entire weapon and felt every part with his hands. Everything was within engineering tolerances. Everything measured perfectly. But when he reassembled the bolt carrier and pushed it by hand, he noticed something. A slight hesitation. A tiny bind. The channel was subtly warped, less than 0.002 inches over a foot. Technically acceptable, but in sub-zero temperatures, with thick lubricant and contracting metal, that microscopic flaw became fatal. Green understood something the engineers didn't. Machines don't care about math. They care about motion. What Green did next would horrify any military engineer. He grabbed a precision file and gently removed 0.003 inches from the bolt carrier, widening the gap far beyond spec. In official terms, he had destroyed the weapon. But in Green's view, he'd done something far more important. He'd made room for the machine to breathe. He placed the weapon in a deep freeze chamber at minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 hours. Then he fired it. 100 rounds. Then 200. 500. No jams. No hesitation. Just perfect, relentless function. He had broken every rule. And in doing so, he had fixed the unfixable. The range officer stared at Green, stunned. "You changed the dimensions outside of tolerance," he said, horrified. "That's illegal." But Green stayed calm. "The specs create a weapon that jams," he replied. "My change creates a weapon that works. Which one matters more?" Within hours, the test gun was sent to Eglin Field. Major Johnson, skeptical but desperate, ran the same test. The results were identical, flawless. 0 malfunctions under the most brutal conditions. Johnson had seen enough. He summoned Samuel Green immediately. But what Green walked into wasn't praise. It was a firefight of egos, engineers, and institutional disbelief. When Green arrived at Eglin Field, he was met not with thanks but with suspicion. A panel of military engineers, PhDs from the Aberdeen Proving Ground, and representatives from Browning Arms waited to confront him. "Explain yourself," Major Johnson said. "How did you do it?" Green simply said, "I made the bolt carrier smaller." A doctor of engineering snapped. "That's mechanically unsound. It violates the core principles of automatic weapon design." Green paused, then answered without blinking, "Sir, I don't understand your mathematics, but I do understand machines, and the gun works." The room exploded in argument. But Johnson wasn't there for debate. He was there for results. Major Johnson didn't care about academic credentials or theoretical objections. He cared about the war and saving the airmen who were dying because their guns jammed. So on February 1st, 1943, Green's modified M2 was put through hell. Frozen to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, dragged through sand, fouled with dirt, fired nonstop. The weapon didn't jam, not once. Over 2,000 rounds ran through it flawlessly. Every engineer in the room had to face a brutal truth. Their numbers said it shouldn't work, but the machine said otherwise. Johnson had his answer. Now he needed a plan. An emergency meeting followed. Green, Johnson, ordnance engineers, and Browning reps all crammed into one room. Green calmly explained, "I filed the bolt carrier smaller by 0.03 of an inch. That gives it the room to move, even when the channel isn't perfect, even when it's cold." The engineers were outraged. "You're degrading precision," one shouted. "That gap will affect everything." But Green didn't flinch. "The precision you're defending is what's jamming the weapon." He wasn't attacking science. He was defending function. And his logic was devastatingly simple. If it works, it works. The debate raged until Johnson slammed his hand on the table. "Enough. This isn't theory class. We're in a war. I've seen the results. I'm ordering full-scale testing." Just like that, the room went silent. Green had forced the military to listen, not with politics or paperwork, but with performance. His unacceptable change had succeeded where every conventional fix had failed. It wasn't just a technical breakthrough. It was a challenge to the system itself. The real test had only just begun. 20 M2s, all from different manufacturers, were modified by Green himself. They were thrown into a gauntlet of testing, firing at altitude chambers simulating 30,000 feet, freezing temperatures, prolonged stress, fouling trials, every condition that had previously crippled the weapon. The result? an unheard of 0.8% malfunction rate. Standard M2S still failing at 68%. Green's modification hadn't just improved the weapon, it had nearly perfected it. But now came the real challenge. How do you change almost every machine gun in the U.S. arsenal? The scale was staggering. Over 96,000 minutes and 2 seconds were already in service. Another 60,000 were being produced. The Ordnance Department estimated it would take 18 months and $12 million to implement Green's fix across the board. Meanwhile, men were still dying. And while generals like Leslie McNair and Henry Arnold demanded action, bureaucrats insisted on more studies, more paperwork, more delays. The truth was staring them in the face, but the system was still hesitating. That's when the man who could cut through it all stepped in. It was Lieutenant General William Knudsen, Director of War Production, who made the difference. He flew to Eglin Field and watched the modified weapons fire under brutal conditions. Then he asked Green 2 questions. Can this fix be performed quickly by trained armorers? And can production lines apply the change without slowing down? Green answered both with a quiet confidence. Yes, 45 minutes per weapon. No special equipment needed. Production just changes the machining spec. Knudsen nodded once. That was all he needed. Knudsen didn't ask for another report. He didn't call for a meeting. He made the decision right there on the test range. Implement it. Everywhere. That moment changed history. Orders went out to every military production line and armory in the country. The modification would be called Modification 743, but everyone knew it as Green's fix. In days, the military's industrial engine began to move, and it moved fast. What happened next was a showcase of American industrial power. In just 1 week, detailed instructions were sent to every armory worldwide. 2 weeks later, production lines across the country were cutting to Green's new spec. Mobile modification teams began traveling to air bases in the U.S. and overseas, updating guns in the field. Within 3 months, over 40,000 weapons had been modified. Within 6, all 96,000 were done. Green's fix wasn't just brilliant, it was scalable. The system had finally caught up to the solution. The difference on the battlefield was dramatic. In March 1943, before wide implementation, 57% of bomber missions still reported gun malfunctions. But by April, with just 30% of weapons modified, that number dropped to 38%. By June, nearly all M2S carried Green's fix. Malfunctions dropped below 4%. More importantly, bomber crews started coming home. Aircraft that had once been sitting ducks now tore through German fighters with consistent defensive fire. The weapon that had been America's biggest liability became its most reliable defense. All because one man filed a part differently. Even the enemy took note. German Luftwaffe intelligence, monitoring American bombers, noticed the change. Captured pilots reported that American defensive fire had become relentless and sustained. Their gunners no longer stopped firing midway through the attack, one report said. We're seeing fewer weak points. Bombers are now much more dangerous. The fix that engineers had called mechanically unsound was now changing the very behavior of the war. Samuel Green hadn't just solved the mechanical problem. He had changed the way America fought in the skies. The improvements weren't limited to Europe. Across the Pacific, where heat, humidity, and salt corroded everything, the newly modified M2S proved just as reliable. Tank commanders reported flawless operation in desert dust. Navy ships used the gun successfully against kamikaze aircraft in chaotic, high-speed attacks. Infantry squads stopped worrying about weapon jams mid-battle. In the air, crews who once feared the skies now trusted their defenses. Green's fix didn't just reduce malfunctions. It gave men confidence. It gave them a chance to survive. And in one especially dramatic case, it may have saved the life of a future legend. In November 1943, Captain Robert Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group took 21 cannon hits and more than 100 machine gun rounds to his aircraft. Despite the damage, his M2S never jammed. He fought back, landed, and went on to become one of America's top aces with 27 kills. Engineers later confirmed, without Green's modification, his guns would have locked up. That kind of reliability became the new standard. Post-war weapons like the M60 and M16 adopted Green's principles. Real-world tolerance mattered more than mathematical perfection. The toolmaker's approach, feel over formula, became embedded in American weapons design. In April 1943, Samuel Green was awarded the Medal for Merit by General Henry Arnold himself. The citation praised his contribution to saving countless lives. But Green didn't smile for cameras. He didn't bask in the moment. He accepted the medal quietly, offered a simple thank you, and returned to his workbench in Hartford. He never gave interviews. He never sought fame. Colleagues said he displayed the medal